Everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Helen. Yes, my name is Jordan Hirsch, and I'm going to talk to you about requirements. Any questions so far? Great. The point of this slide is to let you know that you do not need to wait until the end. If you have questions as I go, please feel free to ask them. I have a question, which is, what have I done with my notes? Found them. Excellent. Before we get started, could those who are able kindly stand up for a moment? Yep, they didn't warn you there was going to be an exercise portion of today. All right, we're going to do just a little breathing together. So we're going to do arms up on a big inhale. And then a big audible sigh for our exhale. Okay, I heard a couple of you. Let's try a bigger one. Inhale. Big sigh. All right, now one more. This one's for all the marbles. Ready? Inhale. Excellent. You may be seated. Why did we do that? We did that because science tells us that your brains are now in a more receptive state to new information. It's true. You can look it up. Probably someone here at NSF can tell us if that's real. And therefore, you're in the perfect mindset for gathering requirements, which is what I'm talking about. So, who am I? My name is Jordan Hirsch. Once again, I am the Director of Digital Strategy for an organization called Phase 2. We are an agency. We do digital strategy consulting. We do web development, implementations. We do requirements. We do design. We do user experience. In my background, I have been a web developer for many, many years. And I have seen a lot of projects live or die by the strength of their requirements and their requirements gathering efforts. So right now, in my current role, a large part of what I do is I help clients think about what the right things are to think about before they invest in a huge technology project, or even a small one, right? Before you start investing time and money in something, what are you really trying to go for, and what is actually required to make it a success? The theme of my talk today is tell me what you want, and I'll give you what you need. Usually when I give this talk, I start off with a little music. This is a Doobie Brothers song, for those of you who'd like to look it up at home. I think it's a great song. I think the message is even better, though. Very often, when we are thinking about requirements, we are hearing someone tell us what they want, right? Like in Helen's example, her boss says, I want 500 printers. Great. What do you actually need? What you actually need are 500 printers that fit in the space we have available, and that cost a certain amount, and that are going to be available by a certain date, and that can print in color, and that have an accessible user interface, and then take the kind of paper that we need, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a big gap often between what someone tells you that they want, or even what you might think you want, and what someone actually needs. Before we go any further, I should say I am not an accessibility expert. I am not a 508 expert, but I am a requirements expert. So a good way to think about this talk is perhaps it's more about the philosophy of successful requirements gathering than it is about the specifics of 508 requirements. I think all requirements are alike in many ways, and I think that there are a set of tools and a mindset that you can use that will help you be successful in any requirements gathering effort. Any questions so far? Don't be shy. All right. So the problem, here's what we're up against. For those who can't see the slide, what we have is a series of pictures working our way through a tree swing, right? So like a tire swing, basically. So our first one is how the customer explained it. And we have this beautiful swing with 3 wooden slats, and it looks really nice. We go from there to how the project leader understood it, which is an almost as beautiful swing with 1 wooden slat. Okay, so we're close. How the analyst designed it, we've got our wooden slat, but half the tree is missing. How the programmer wrote it is that the swing is sitting gently on the ground next to the tree because the rope is twice as long as it should be, and therefore it's never actually going to work. How the business consultant described it. It is a gorgeous, overstuffed armchair floating in a tree. How the project was documented. That slide is not found. What operations installed? You just get a single piece of rope. How the customer was billed, of course, is our roller coaster, which has nothing to do with anything other than being horrendously expensive. How the project was supported after launch is just a tree stump. And what the customer really needed was a tire swing. I love this graphic. I do not know who wrote it originally, so I can't give proper attribution, but I do think it does a great job explaining the gap between what someone needs versus what they say, versus what someone hears, versus what gets documented and written down, versus what actually gets built. So I don't know if any of you have ever suffered through an end result not matching the thing you thought you were asking for, but there are ways around this problem, and it is very common. I think good requirements gathering practices can help to alleviate this problem. Any questions thus far about our tire swim? All right, but we don't need requirements. Just make it accessible. That is a requirement in and of itself, right? No one in this room would ever say that, right? If anyone in this room has said that, you can confess now. It's a safe space. Raise your hand. But really, I mean, I've heard people say, well, you know, I gave you the technical specs. Isn't that enough, right? Technical specs are not requirements. They are only part of requirements. They are they are necessary, but not sufficient. Very often, people who are short on things like budget and time, which I'm sure are none of you, but out in other parts of the world where people are actually short on these things, it's very easy to want to skip over a requirements gathering phase or a requirements documentation phase. All right, it sounds luxurious, but it's actually essential. I think a basic truth about requirements is that if you skip over it in service of saving time and money, if you skip over your requirements gathering effort, you're actually going to spend that time and money anyway. You're just going to spend it later on in your project. So you can either budget for it and account for it at the beginning, or it can come as a really unpleasant surprise at the end. All right? If you skip your requirements gathering, you are essentially flying blind, which is not the safest way to fly, even if you have a great interpreter with you. So, what makes requirements gathering efforts successful? Well, first, understanding that requirements are requirements are requirements. We've got here a slide of two apples on a scale showing that apples to apples really are the same thing. Accessibility requirements are going to look and act and feel a lot different than standard requirements that you might see for building a website, or for building a piece of software, or for documenting how a printer works. But the idea is the same, right? You are documenting your vision so that an implementer can bring that vision to life. It's easy to think that an automated tool may capture all those requirements for you. I know Alan has a tool up on the Section 508 website. There is a wizard you can go through that will help you gather your 508 accessibility requirements, but that is not the entirety of the process. Don't be fooled into thinking that the tool can do it all for you. The tool is great, but the tool doesn't understand what your bigger vision is. Why are you doing this thing? The tool helps you document, certainly. And I think anything that helps you document and gather requirements faster is great, but it's not enough. All right? It's not enough just to, if you were going to hire a general contractor to redo your kitchen, you wouldn't just give them the output of the, what kitchen do I want wizard from the hardware store website and say, here you go, this is the kitchen that I want, just I'm sure everything will be fine, I'll see you in 6 months. That would be a bad move. So obviously a better move is to actually sit down, have a series of conversations, walk through things together, right? So requirements, again, these are the things, even in the world of accessibility, which is a very unique world, the concept of requirements is pretty general. It's what you give to an implementer or a vendor or someone that you're acquiring something from in order to communicate the vision of what success looks like. A GAO study done in 2015 actually attributed the #1 reason of failure of Department of Defense acquisition program outcomes to poorly defined requirements. And these were all acquisitions where people had requirements defined at the beginning, and they said that the top level requirements remained more or less intact, but little by little, details got missed. Things started to change, and no one kept up with them, and suddenly things are costing millions and millions and millions of extra dollars. The requirements do have a real world impact. Any questions? Is that a question or just a cough? Just a cough, excellent. So what's the first thing to ask when you are gathering requirements? The first thing to ask is, why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? We've got a picture of the universe up here, or excuse me, a galaxy. What are we doing here? Even if you think you know the purpose of your software project or your acquisition, write it down. Right? Put something on paper. Be accessible is not a great goal. It doesn't really tell you anything. Be accessible for whom? Be accessible why? Be accessible in what way? What scenarios? What are we actually trying to achieve? Goals for any sort of project provide a framework for decision making, and they provide a way to explain your decision making to other parties. Right? If you want someone to understand why something costs so much, or why you made a certain decision, or why you're going with this printer instead of that one, being able to explain what you were actually trying to achieve and how this thing fits into that vision helps you explain that decision to other people. It helps you prioritize as you go, and it helps you make meaningful decisions. Right? When something new comes up in a project, if you have goals that are documented and actually signed off on by all your stakeholders, you now have something you can go back to and say, hey, does this fit into our goals? If not, maybe this isn't really a requirement. Or if a lot of requirements keep coming up that don't match one of your goals, maybe we missed one of the goals. Right? Maybe the project isn't quite what we thought it was at the beginning. Very, very common scenario. So having a common, shared, documented understanding of what you're trying to achieve is an essential starting point for even a simple project. Any questions? All right, keep calm and prioritize. So now you know what you're trying to achieve. Next, you need to figure out what are the most important things that are going to get you there, right? What matters most? I'm sure this will come as a shock, so I'm glad you're all sitting down, but you actually can't usually do everything in a project with a given time and given budget, right? You have to pare down, and you have to go in order of priority. In the software world where I work, we use agile methodologies, and we work with something called the MVP, the minimum viable product. MVP is one way of thinking about what is the most important thing, what are the set of features that actually absolutely have to be present in something in order for this thing to be viable. Not even a massive success, but just viable, right? The printer has to print. It has to print in color, and it has to print double-sided. Does it have to collate? Maybe, maybe not, right? Maybe collation doesn't actually match up with one of our goals, so maybe that can wait until later. We are not Santa Clauses. We can't deliver everything to everyone. But if we understand what we're trying to achieve, then we can rank things in order and make some meaningful decisions about what order to go in as we're looking at feature sets and functions in a piece of software, for example. Without prioritizing, you can easily waste time and money on things that are not actually the most important things in your project or in your acquisition. And again, wasting time and money, dangerous thing to do. Questions about prioritization? Is anyone awake? So I didn't give you lunch first, that's the problem. We're out of donut holes, I apologize. All right, so you've got your goals, you've prioritized, you know what's important. Up next is actively listening to stakeholders. Let's say you're building a piece of software, right? And you want to know, okay, what are the needs of this or that individual? So you go and you interview someone and you're listening, at least you think you're listening. So according to a Harvard Business Review study, in our fractured age, modern times, immediately after hearing someone talk, people forget, on average, 1/2 of what they heard. That's immediately, right? Even a talk as compelling as this one, right after this, you will immediately forget half of what you heard. After that, within the first 8 hours, you will lose another 1/2 to 1/3 of the little bit that you did retain. And yet, all the time we have conversations with people when we think we've communicated something effectively. And actually, I lied. That wasn't in today's modern age when everyone is holding a laptop and a cell phone all the time. This was in 1957, when supposedly we were far more focused and paying far more attention to each other. So with that in mind, what can we do? How can we combat that? How can we actually hear more of what we need to hear? We can practice something called active listening. Active listening takes into account the fact that A, we forget, and B, people won't tell you everything even when you ask. Active listening is paying attention to what's not being said. It's paying attention to tone and to body language. It's filling in context around these things. For example, if I say, well, the deadline has been moved up a week. That's a different message than, the deadline's been moved up a week. And that's a different message than, the deadline's been moved up just by a week. Right? Those are 3 different messages. Without the context, they sound the same. Right? Without the context, they potentially mean the same thing, but actively listening, they can mean 3 very different things. they can be gateways to 3 different conversations. A good way to actively listen is to ask someone to repeat back something that they've said. Right? You can use a phrase like, help me understand. Why does it have to be done at the end of this week on Friday at 5, right when I was about to go home? Help me understand that decision. Maybe this never happened here, right? Maybe there are pressures on the person asking you to do this thing that you're not aware of, and maybe understanding them can actually help you find another solution that doesn't require you to work late on Friday night. Or, I heard you say such and such. Do I understand you correctly? Simple phrases like that not only help you understand requirements better and really get more out of a conversation, they're also kind of a cool spy trick you can play on people. Research has shown, there was a study in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology a few years ago that showed that just by asking someone to tell you more about whatever they're talking about makes them like you more, and it makes them want to help you. So you can think of it like a Jedi mind trick. Use this at a party, use this in real life. No matter what someone's talking about, even if it's totally boring, just say, really, tell me more about that. Suddenly a little light goes off inside, and like, this person is great. What a fun conversation I'm having with this person. That works at work too. All right, that works on someone who's trying to give you requirements and who's maybe their time is limited and they don't really have time to give you the full story and they just want to give you a stack of documentation. Tell me more. Takes them outside of their day-to-day, takes them outside of whatever moment they're having, makes them feel wanted, makes them feel liked, and it makes them want to share more information with you. Very, very simple trick, but very powerful, so don't tell anyone outside this room. It's just for us. Other ways to practice active listening, frequent eye contact. Hi, you guys are killing it. Frequent eye contact. Taking notes with a pencil and paper. I didn't have the source with me, but there was a study not too long ago at a university that showed that students who took notes with a pencil or a pen and paper retained far more information on a subsequent test than students who took notes on a laptop. On a laptop, we all tend to become court reporters and transcribers, and we write down everything because it's so easy. And what we're doing is we're just passing information through our brains and directly out to our fingers. We're not stopping to think, is this element worth taking a note of? Is this thing more important than something else that I've heard? As opposed to pencil and paper, you're only going to write down the important things. It feels pretty old school. You will get some strange looks in a meeting when you say, hang on, let me take notes. And you pull out a notepad and a pen, but you will actually end up capturing more information. So just imagine the power if you're at a party and you pull that out and you say, really, tell me more. That's why reporters do it, because reporters write down only the important things. They don't write down everything. Any questions about active listening? No? All right. Why? Why ask why? The visual up here, we've got a big street sign with a question mark. It says who, what, where, why, when, how. Those are all important things to ask. I think why is one of the most important in the area of requirements. Why do I think it's so important? I'll relate a recent example. A client of mine not too long ago, this is a large multinational organization, rhymes with United Nations. They asked me for one of their departments, we were working on a website with them, and they said, we need you to update the text on our About Us page. We need a rewrite of the About Us page. I said, okay, great, sure. I'm taking down information about what they wanted to say, and I said, why are we updating this page? I said, oh, well, people can't change their password. Okay. So immediately, I'm not really seeing the distinction. I've been doing software for a while, but I'm not seeing the connection between the About Us page and a broken password form, but sure. Okay, so why is that people can't change their password? Well, people don't understand how to use the change password form. Okay, so you want to change the About Us page, which should have nothing to do with your password form, to include a section about how to successfully change your password on the website. So just by asking why, politely, a few times, and using phrases like, help me understand, and making eye contact, I was able to get to an actual requirement, which was to redo the user interface of the change password form, because it was difficult to use, it wasn't accessible, and it was broken half the time in various browsers. So I could have given them what they asked for, could have given them what they wanted, which was some help text, a lengthy chunk of it, which would tell you, you have to use this browser under these conditions, and Has to be a Tuesday when the moon is full, and then your password change will work. Or we could go and fix the actual problem. So if you're not asking why frequently, you are running a real risk of solving the wrong problem. You'll still get a warm, tingly feeling from solving a problem, but you'll then have to go back and solve the real one eventually. All the while, time is passing, the cost of delay is going up. Any questions about asking why? Why a group? It's usually a lot more questions when people have eaten first. Okay, know your stakeholders. Our image here, for those who can't see it, is a still from South Park. We have a group of angry villagers holding pitchforks and torches. These do not have to be your stakeholders, but they can be. They can be if you're not careful. Talk to the right people when you're gathering requirements for something, right? Really think through your process. Let's say you're building a software tool. Maybe it's going to have an editorial interface. Maybe it's a content management system. Who's going to use it? What are their technical abilities? What constraints are they under? Are they going to get training? Do they have time to learn a new system? Do they want to use a new system? Are they going to already be coming in with a poor attitude? For technology change, forcing a new technology on someone who doesn't want it can sink your efforts. Forcing a new technology on someone who doesn't want it after you've asked them their opinion and simply given them a chance to say, I don't want it, actually changes their minds quite a bit. It's true. It's true. People are more predisposed to like something that they hate just because they got to say that they hated it. Right? Human brains are strange. But truly, giving someone a chance to give their input, even if that input is disregarded. Now, I'm not saying you should disregard their input, but you can say, you can explain, thank you for sharing this with me. This is going on to a big list of requirements. I'm not the final prioritizer, maybe. But just making them heard, just saying, hey, maybe this changes to the interface are going to come in a future release. We've heard you. We're going to make some attempt to make this tool be useful for you. Goes such a long way with people. Making people, nothing actually makes people feel heard quite like hearing them. People love that. Also, don't forget, your projects can have hidden stakeholders. There's executives who need to sign off on things. Executives love to be consulted for their opinion, even if you're not going to use it. There's that one person somewhere who uses the old tool every day to run this 50-page custom report that no one else in the organization knows about. And the whole success of your funding model depends on this report getting to the right people, but you didn't ask that person how they do it, and then you went and rebuilt the tool and you said, oh, we don't really need a reporting. That won't be in release 1. And then you find out too late, oops. The most important part of this thing that no one knew about is now missing. All right? Your users are stakeholders. Everyone who has to touch a tool is a stakeholder. You may not have a lot of time when you're gathering requirements to talk to everyone, but if you can just talk to a few people, if you can talk to even one person and say, hey, you are my representative for 500 other users. I can't talk to them, but I can hear your opinion. I can hear your take on what you need. That goes a long way towards building usability into your tool. And it goes a long way towards making sure that your requirements are actually in service of the people who have to use something. All right, if you skip this, you can end up with a tool that no one wants or that they can't use, and you can end up with a bunch of disgruntled users who are holding torches and pitchforks and burning down your expensive, shiny new technology project. Any questions about stakeholders? All right. Oh, but we used to do it the old way. Why do we have to change? This is a picture of a computer circa 1981, 82. Maybe around then. An old IBM workstation. The point of this is don't let old workarounds drive new requirements, right? That person you spoke to who runs that one custom 50-page report, well, the way they do it is, no, sit down, it's going to take a while. I need to walk you through the whole thing for me to feel heard. See, so I click here, and then I click here, and then I have to print this thing out, and then I scan it back into this other thing, and I put it back over there into the other system. Then I have to walk over to the mainframe, and then it's 25 more steps. You will quickly learn that the way that a lot of people tend to interact with older technologies is not the way that they should be interacting with them. It's not at all an ideal way to interact with technology. People create their own workarounds, right? People are very smart. We are clever. We have to get our things done. So if the tool doesn't do it the way you need it to do it, chances are you will figure out a way to make the tool do it. The way that you're using it is not a requirement for the new tool. right? The way that we sort of bolted accessibility onto the old website is not necessarily the way we should do it for the new one. Beware of just replicating something that someone says, well, it has to do this. Let's say someone says, well, it has to do this, and they outline this weird 25-step process. What might you ask to get to the actual underlying need?
Why?
Who said that?
Why?
You win. If there were any more donut holes, I would get you one. Yes, exactly. You can ask why. Why do you perform these 25 steps? Oh, well, I need to run this report, and the old system didn't have a reporting tool. Oh, now we have a requirement, right? Now we have something meaningful. Before, what we had was a specification. We've specified 25 useless steps that we can throw away. If you just rebuild the old system exactly, you can end up with a new system that sucks just as hard as the old one. Pardon my French. Any questions about recreating workarounds? Excellent. Put down the hammer. This is a great tip when gathering requirements. So the visual here, we have a hammer and a nail together with a green check mark. Great, hammers are perfect for nails. I don't remember where I found this graphic, but I love it. We have a hammer with a bunch of screws and a red X. Hammer is not so good for screws. We have a hammer and a skull together for some reason, also a red X. Unless your goal is to destroy a skull, I don't think a hammer is the right tool for examining a skull. And then we have a hammer with a beautiful, bright blue new car. Probably also not the tool you want for a car. What does this mean? This means when you're gathering requirements, even for accessibility, you want your focus to be on the requirements, not on the tool. If you start with a tool in mind when you're gathering requirements for how something needs to work, you will very quickly end up thinking through that filter, right? Our brains are great at filtering. We have so much information coming at us. Even in 1957, we were only remembering half of what we heard. We have so much information coming at us that our brain puts up defenses and shields and filters to try to filter out the irrelevant things. If you say, okay, well, cool, we're going to use such and such tool to build this thing, before you know what the requirements are, then any requirement you hear is going to go through that filter. You're going to be focusing on, well, the tool doesn't really do that, so maybe that requirement's not important. Or the tool is great at this thing, so this thing is now a super important requirement, even though literally no one asked for it. Right? These decisions can affect your way of thinking in a very, very dangerous way when you're gathering requirements. So really pay attention to the what you need, not the how. The how can come later. Work with your vendor, work with your developers. You can adapt tools to your uses. Even if you get a decision of a tool forced on you, try not to think about it. Still focus on what you really need in terms of requirements, and then we can figure out how to make the tool do it. If you start with a tool in mind, you can overlook important requirements, or you can find yourself saying a lot of, oh, well, it doesn't really do that. Nobody wants to hear that. Any questions about tools? Cool. Accessibility, just a reminder, is not something you can bolt on at the end. Well, you can, but it will probably take twice as long, cost twice as much, and be half as effective. Our visual here is, what's his name from Lord of the Rings, saying, one does not simply make the site accessible. I have lost count of how many times when I have worked with accessibility, someone has said, oh, and after lunch, just take a week and just add accessibility to the site. And I get to have the same fun conversation of, well, actually, accessibility is something you plan for from the beginning in a project because blah, 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 blah. It takes a lot of time. It's a big effort. You have to plan appropriately for it. I'm sure you all know this, but it's not a bad thing to remind other people of when they tell you, oh, well, just make it accessible. How long could it possibly take, right? You can show them real numbers that it does take time and planning, and that like anything else, you will get out of it what you put into it. Any questions about trying to tack accessibility on at the end? Excellent. Go. Oh, well, my graphic of a beautiful Robbie the robot is covering up the word human, which is a good reminder that we're all only human and humans make mistakes. So I made a mistake with this slide. So something to remember in requirements gathering is that you probably didn't get everything, right? Even the best requirement effort doesn't get everything because we are all humans. Humans are imperfect creatures. Unlike robots, we make mistakes. We'll think of things that maybe we meant to ask later. Someone will think of something after you leave their office and say, oh, I probably should have mentioned that the printers also can't be bigger than 3 feet wide, even though the paper that we're going to be printing on is plotter paper, and that's 4 feet wide. But the desk they're going on is only 3 feet. You know what? They'll figure it out later. Things will change, priorities will shift, important information will come to light, right? You can build in time, if you explain to people ahead of time that you'll be doing this, you can build in time later on for managing your requirements. Try to remember that requirements gathering is not something that necessarily ends. I know we don't always have the luxury of forever ongoing requirements phases, but just keeping in mind that there will be some follow-up and some revisiting of these things I think is very important. Requirements are not as static as we'd like them to be. So you're already starting at a disadvantage because you're human and therefore you're not perfect. So spending a little time managing requirements as you go can help you mitigate that fact. Questions? All right. It ain't over till it's over. So there's a beautiful graphic of the ocean saying this is not the end. It's almost the end of my talk, don't worry. But this is not the end. This is the beginning. Same point. Managing requirements is just as important as eliciting them. I have 2 slides about this because I think it's that important and it's very easy to overlook, and you'll forget half of what I said anyway. Revisit your goals. Keep prioritizing. At the end of your project, make sure that what you've actually lined up in your requirements actually matches up to your goals. Right? Did we get the goals right? Are these really the requirements we need? It doesn't hurt to even think about having a bit of a content strategy for your requirements. How are we going to document them? Who needs to see them? How are we going to make sure they're disseminated properly? How are we going to make sure that people understand them? Right? Maybe we need to have some actual human conversations, keeping in mind the other person will forget half of what you say. So don't assume that nothing will change during your project. And I'm sure none of you need this reminder, but make your requirements accessible too, right? We've got a great graphic here of a gentleman in a wheelchair staring rather forlornly at a staircase in front of him with no ramp to be found. Remember those stakeholders? Well, those people might actually need to read your requirements and sign off on them. If you are walking the walk with accessibility as you go, right? If you're building accessibility into your own efforts as you proceed, you will find that it gets easier to build it into your software or into any other thing that you are trying to achieve. Any further questions? Would anybody like to participate in a fun exercise for fun? All right, could I get 2 volunteers at the front, please?
What am I volunteering for?
Song and dance, come on up.
I thought I was going to pass something out. I didn't think I was...
Can I get a second volunteer? Second volunteer. You. Thank you. If one of you has a pen and paper, that would be great. Being only human, I forgot to bring some. While they're coming up here, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to shout them out.
Alright.
Okay. You guys are going to have 5 minutes of fun. Kindly take some seats up here where everyone can hear you. We're going to do a little mini requirements gathering exercise live in front of a crowd, which is a great condition under which to work. No pressure at all. All right. Who would like to be the client and who would like to be the vendor? Perfect. You're the client. You spoke first. Client's left to speak first. Wait. Don't show this to your vendor there. Did you already see it?
No.
All right. This is just for you to see. You can say this word at the top. So she's looking at something. I won't show it to you yet because we're going to have 2 more volunteers in a few minutes. He's looking at a piece of paper with a picture of something on it and a word at the top. You can say the word at the top to your vendor there.
It's a vehicle. It's a...
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, there's a little button on the front. Push it. There, it's on.
Can you hear me? It's a vehicle.
Perfect. So it's a vehicle. You, the vendor, are going to have, let's say, 3 minutes to ask him questions about this vehicle. You're going to gather requirements as though you were going to build this vehicle. Okay? Don't tell her exactly what kind of vehicle it is.
Okay. Is it just yes or no questions, or is it...
No, you can get a little bit more involved
Alright.
if you like, but you can't volunteer exactly what it is because much like a typical stakeholder, you know exactly what you mean, but you can't just say it. That would be too easy. All right? 3 minutes. So you're going to be asking him questions.
Okay.